So today we're diving into something pretty fascinating, creation museums. These are places where faith, science, and a whole lot of showmanship all crash into each other. We're going to break down the specific blueprint these places use to present their beliefs. And our guide for this is a really interesting Harvard thesis by Julianne Duncan that took a deep dive into this world.
So take a look at this. You might think this is from a movie, right? But it's actually an exhibit from the Answers in Genesis Creation Museum. It's showing a world where people and dinosaurs were just hanging out together. And this isn't just a fun little detail. It's a core belief. These museums are designed to be immersive arguments. And that's what's so interesting here. It's not really about what they believe, it's about how they try to convince you.
And that really is the central question for us. We're not here to debate the beliefs themselves. Instead, we're going to pull back the curtain on the techniques they use. How do you take religious doctrine and wrap it in the language and symbols of science to make it look credible? It's actually a pretty sophisticated strategy, and we're going to look at the three key parts of their blueprint.
All right, so the first piece of this blueprint, it's all about what you could call the performance of science. This isn't really about the evidence yet. It's about creating an atmosphere, an aura of scientific legitimacy. It's like they're setting the stage, you know? They work really hard to look and sound the part, building this foundation of authority before you even look at a single fossil.
Okay, so meet Carl Baugh. He's the founder of the Creation Evidence Museum in Texas. And his whole story kicks off with this really dramatic moment, finding what he says is a human footprint right there in the same rock layer as dinosaur tracks. This kind of personal story, this eureka moment, is super powerful. It makes the whole museum feel like it's built on a brave scientific discovery, not just a set of pre-existing beliefs.
And this is where that whole idea of authority gets, well, really interesting. The founders, people like Carl Baugh and another guy named Kent Hovind, who famously goes by Dr. Dino, they often use these impressive academic titles. But when you dig into it, like Duncan's research did, you find that these degrees, well, they often come from schools that aren't accredited. Some people call them diploma mills. So the titles sound official, but the schools just aren't recognized by the mainstream academic community.
And here's a perfect example of what we're talking about. This is from the course catalog for Patriot Bible University. That's where Kent Hovind got his doctorate. You can literally buy the courses online, and they're designed so you can finish them in just a few weeks. And you can see why it works, right? For most people walking through the museum, that title doctor is all they need to see. It just signals expert. Another big part of this performance is using super technical sounding language. I mean, listen to this. The hyperbaric biosphere. Wow, that sounds like something you'd find at NASA, doesn't it? It's described as this complex, 92,000-pound machine built to recreate the atmosphere of Earth before Noah's flood. The whole idea is to run experiments on what that world was like. Okay, so here it is. This is the hyperbaric biosphere. And yeah, the difference between the name and the reality is pretty stark. While the name makes you think of cutting-edge technology, what you're actually looking at seems a lot more homemade. This gap between the complex scientific name and the actual object is a theme. It's all about creating that feeling of high-tech science. So you see how it all fits together? This first strategy is a performance with a few key acts. They borrow authority by name-dropping places like NASA. They use jargon to make simple things sound complex, like calling scissors turbulence minimizers. And they use this subtle peer pressure, saying things like, thinkers will instantly recognize, which implies that if you don't agree, well, maybe you're not a thinker. It all works to create this powerful illusion. Okay, so once that stage of scientific authority is set, we move on to the second part of the blueprint. This is where they deal with the actual scientific evidence. And the core argument they make is fascinating. They say, hey, we're looking at the same facts as everyone else. We just have a different starting point for our interpretation. And that starting point? It's the Bible. So what you're looking at here is a chart of real, raw scientific data from an ice core in Greenland. Mainstream scientists use this kind of data to map out climate change over hundreds of thousands of years. And this is clever, because creation museums will show you this exact same data. They're making the point that they aren't afraid of the science. They're engaging with it head-on. But here's the twist. This is where that reinterpretation happens. An organization called the Institute for Creation Research takes those same data points and just recharts them. They apply their own assumptions based on a timeline from the Bible. And bam! They come up with a totally different conclusion. Not a long ice age ending 10,000 years ago, but one single massive ice age right after the flood about 4,500 years ago. Same data, radically different story.
And then they take this reinterpreted story and package it all up in these incredibly polished, professional-looking exhibits. They create their own scientific-sounding models, like ecological zonation, to explain the fossil record, or catastrophic plate tectonics. And honestly, these displays look just as good as anything you'd find in a major natural history museum. It gives their version a really powerful visual authority.
Okay, so we've got the performance of science, and we've got the reinterpretation of evidence. That sets the stage for the third, and maybe the most powerful piece of the whole puzzle. It's not enough to just have an alternative science. You have to frame the whole thing as a massive culture war, a battle between two completely different worldviews with huge moral consequences.
And this is where the messaging gets, well, incredibly direct and pretty shocking. This exhibit right here draws a straight line connecting the theory of evolution to the actions of the Hitler Youth. By making connections like that, the conversation completely changes. It's not a scientific debate anymore, is it? It's a moral battle between good and evil.
And that attack, it goes right for the classroom. An exhibit like Lies in the Textbooks will take pages torn from actual biology textbooks and just stamp them with the word lie in huge red letters. The message here is crystal clear. The scientific establishment isn't just wrong, they are actively lying to your kids.
And then they raise the stakes even higher. Take a look at this collage. It's basically drawing a straight line from the idea that people stopped believing the Bible literally to all of these major societal problems, school shootings, gay marriage, you name it. The argument is that these scientific ideas aren't just ideas. They have real dangerous consequences that lead to moral decay. And really, this quote from Kent Hovind just says it all, doesn't it? It frames the whole thing as an ultimatum. There's no middle ground. There's no room to pick and choose. There's a war, and you have to pick a side. It's not about discussion. It's about decision. It's a call to arms.
So let's step back for a second. How does this all actually work? What you realize when you look at it this way is that this isn't just a random collection of strange exhibits. It's a really, really smart communication strategy. These museums are effective because they get the power of presentation. Let's just quickly recap that blueprint.
So here it is, the three-part blueprint for belief. This is really the key takeaway. First, you perform science to look credible. You get the credentials, you use the jargon, you build the lab equipment. Second, you reinterpret the evidence. You take the mainstream facts and fit them to your story. And finally, you frame the narrative. You turn a scientific disagreement into a moral war. It's a powerful formula. You know, when you look at all this, it really forces you to ask a much bigger question that goes way beyond these museums. In a world that's just flooded with information, where everyone is using the language of authority and science to sound convincing, how do you decide who to trust? How do we all figure out which starting points are the right ones? And that's a huge challenge, not just for this topic, but for pretty much everything.